Something unusual is happening around you, and whether you realize it or not, people have started to notice. Conversations are happening when you're not in the room. Opinions are forming about you from different directions. Some people are defending you, others are questioning you, and a few are quietly observing, trying to understand who you really are. But the real question is this: why? Why would people argue about someone who simply minds their own path? Why would your name come up in discussions you were never invited to? And why would someone suddenly say, "I think they're the one"? You might not even feel like a special person. In fact, you may feel like the opposite. You may remember the nights when you doubted yourself, the times when you wondered if anyone even noticed your efforts, the moments when you questioned whether your patience, your discipline, and your quiet strength meant anything at all. But here is something many people fail to understand. Influence does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it moves quietly, shaping the atmosphere around a person without them even realizing it. Think about your own journey for a moment. Haven't you noticed how your perspective has changed over time? Situations that once shook you no longer disturb you the same way. Conflicts that once consumed your mind now seem smaller. And the things that once defined you no longer hold the same power. People notice that. They notice the calmness in someone who has faced chaos. They notice the focus in someone who has endured distractions. They notice the quiet confidence in someone who no longer feels the need to prove themselves. And when people notice something they don't fully understand, what happens? They start talking. Some people admire it. They see resilience, discipline, and maturity. To them, you represent something rare in a world where many people are constantly chasing approval, but others react differently. When someone grows quietly, it can make others uncomfortable. It can make them question their own choices, their own direction, and the paths they decided to follow. And that discomfort can create tension. This is why you may sense that strange energy around you lately. It's as if there are two conversations happening at the same time. One group sees potential and says, "There's something different about that person." Another group looks at the same situation and feels uneasy, asking themselves why your presence seems to carry weight. But here's the surprising part. Many of these conversations aren't actually about you. They're about what you represent. Your patience represents discipline. Your independence represents freedom. Your quiet focus represents clarity. And when someone embodies those qualities, it becomes a mirror for everyone around them. Some people look into that mirror and feel inspired. Others look into it and feel challenged. So when someone says, "Maybe they're the one," it doesn't necessarily mean they see you as perfect or extraordinary. What they might be recognizing is something deeper, a person who stayed consistent while others gave up, someone who kept growing while others stayed stuck. And that kind of presence naturally attracts attention. But here's something you must ask yourself honestly. If people are talking about you, if they're debating your character, if they're wondering whether you represent something meaningful, are you aware of the responsibility that comes with that kind of attention? Because attention, whether positive or negative, has a strange way of testing a person's character, because once attention begins to gather around someone, the environment changes. The same people who once ignored you may now observe you closely. The same voices that once dismissed you may now analyze every step you take. And suddenly, the quiet life you were living begins to feel different. Have you noticed it? Small things start shifting. People listen more carefully when you speak. Some individuals begin asking for your opinion. Others may subtly challenge you, almost as if they are testing whether the reputation forming around you is real or exaggerated. This is where many people misunderstand what is happening. They think the attention is about status, admiration, or popularity, but the truth is far more complex. When someone begins to stand out through patience, growth, and self-control, it creates curiosity. People naturally want to understand how that person became who they are. And curiosity often turns into discussion. Imagine a group of people having a conversation about someone who quietly changed their life. One person says, "There's something different about them now." Another responds, "Maybe they've always been like that, and we just never noticed." A third person might say, "No, something happened. Something changed them." And suddenly, a simple observation becomes a debate. What they are really trying to figure out is not your identity, but your transformation. Because transformation is powerful. When someone evolves mentally, emotionally, and ethically, it challenges the assumptions people once had about them. Think back to the earlier versions of yourself. There were times when you reacted quickly, when frustration took control, when doubt filled your mind. Those moments were part of your growth, just like they are for everyone else. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. Maybe you became more reflective. Maybe you learned to step back before reacting. Maybe you realized that constantly proving yourself to others only drains your energy. So you stopped chasing validation. You focused on discipline instead. You chose patience over impulse. You learned that silence can sometimes say more than 1,000 explanations. And when a person reaches that stage, people around them feel it. They may not be able to explain it clearly, but they can sense the change. It appears in the way you handle pressure. It appears in the way you walk away from unnecessary drama. It appears in the calm tone you maintain, even when others expect anger. That kind of composure is rare, and rarity always attracts attention. Some people admire it deeply. They begin to respect you more. Even if they never say it directly, they might tell others, "That person is different now." There's a level of focus there that most people don't have. But not everyone responds with admiration. There are those who feel unsettled by change. When someone improves themselves, it can unintentionally highlight the areas where others feel stuck. And instead of reflecting on their own situation, some people prefer to question yours. They may say things like, "Who do they think they are?" Or, "Why does everyone suddenly talk about them?" Yet, at the same time, another voice in the room might respond quietly with a different perspective. "No, listen. There's a reason people notice them." And this is where the strange tension begins. Two different interpretations of the same person, existing side by side. One group sees growth, another group sees disruption. And somewhere within that conversation, someone eventually says something that changes the entire tone of the discussion. They say, "What if they're actually the one who figured something out before the rest of us did?" That single idea can shift the entire atmosphere of a conversation. Suddenly, the debate is no longer about rumors or assumptions. It becomes a deeper question about awareness, direction, and character. What did this person figure out? Why do they seem so steady when others feel uncertain? Why do they move with patience when the world around them rushes? Why do they remain calm when situations become chaotic? These questions often appear when someone begins to live with a level of clarity that others are still searching for. And clarity is powerful. It doesn't require loud announcements. It doesn't demand constant explanation. Instead, It shows itself through consistent behavior, through the way someone handles pressure, through the way they treat others, even when no reward is guaranteed. Think about the last time you chose patience, when it would have been easier to react, or the moment you walked away from conflict instead of feeding it. To some people, those moments might seem small, but to an observer, they reveal something important. They reveal self-control. In a world where many people react instantly to emotions, someone who pauses and reflects stands out more than they realize. It signals maturity. It shows that decisions are being made with thought rather than impulse. And that is the moment when people begin to watch more closely, not out of obsession, but out of curiosity. They start asking themselves questions they didn't consider before. How does this person remain balanced when pressure builds? Why do they seem focused on long-term outcomes instead of short-term reactions? These questions slowly turn into recognition. Someone in the discussion eventually says something like, "Maybe they just see things differently." Another voice responds, "Or maybe they've been through experiences that changed the way they think." And both statements may be true. Because growth rarely happens without challenges. Most people who develop strong character do so through moments that tested their patience, their discipline, and their perspective. Difficult experiences force reflection. Reflection leads to understanding, and understanding leads to change. The outside world often sees only the final result. They see the calm version of you, the thoughtful responses, the quiet confidence. But they do not always see the struggles that shaped those qualities. They don't see the moments when you had to rebuild your mindset, the times when you chose learning over resentment, the days when progress felt slow, but you continued anyway. Yet somehow, the result becomes visible. And when people notice that difference, discussions begin to shift in a new direction. Instead of asking, "Why is everyone talking about them?" the question becomes, "What makes them different?" One person might say it's discipline. Another might say it's resilience. Someone else might say it's perspective. But occasionally, a voice speaks up with a slightly different observation. They say, maybe it's not just those things. Maybe it's the fact that they stayed true to their principles when others were losing theirs. That kind of statement carries weight, because integrity is one of the rarest qualities people recognize in others. It means someone is not easily pulled by trends, pressure, or temporary approval. It means their actions remain consistent even when circumstances change. And when people notice consistency like that, they start paying attention in a different way. Not with suspicion, not with judgment, but with respect. And that respect slowly builds into something else, an unspoken acknowledgement that the person they once overlooked might actually have been developing strength all along. Once that realization begins to form, the tone of every conversation about you changes. What once sounded like speculation slowly turns into recognition. People who once overlooked your quiet consistency start revisiting their assumptions. They begin remembering moments they ignored before. The time you stayed calm when everyone else reacted emotionally. The moment you walked away from unnecessary conflict. The occasions when you chose patience instead of proving a point. At the time, those actions may have seemed invisible. But over time, patterns reveal themselves. And when people notice a pattern of discipline, restraint, and clarity, something interesting happens. Respect begins to grow, not the loud kind of respect that appears in public applause or dramatic praise. The deeper kind, the quiet respect people feel when they realize someone has developed a level of control and perspective that cannot be easily shaken. But respect often arrives alongside another emotion, curiosity. People start wondering how you reached this point. What shaped your thinking? What experiences taught you to move with such calm direction? Because the truth is, many people spend years searching for that same sense of clarity. They chase distractions, follow trends, or react to every opinion around them. And somewhere in that noise, they lose focus. So, when they see someone who has learned to step away from that chaos, it catches their attention. This is when the phrase you may have heard begins to carry a different meaning. They might be the one, but that statement isn't about status or superiority. It's not about placing one person above others. What people are really expressing is recognition of awareness. They are acknowledging someone who learned a lesson earlier than most. Someone who realized that constant competition drains energy. Someone who discovered that self-discipline builds strength quietly over time. Someone who understood that true influence doesn't come from forcing attention, it comes from consistency. And when a person reaches that understanding, their presence begins to affect the environment around them. People think more carefully before speaking to them. They measure their words more thoughtfully. They pay closer attention to how that person reacts to pressure. Not because they fear them, but because they sense stability. Stability has a powerful effect in uncertain environments. It becomes a reference point, a reminder that calm thinking and steady character still exist in a world full of quick reactions. But here is the most important part of this entire situation. None of this attention should change who you are. The moment someone begins believing the conversations about them too deeply, they risk losing the very qualities that created respect in the first place. Discipline fades when pride takes over. Clarity disappears when ego becomes louder than reflection. So the real challenge is not the conversations happening around you. The real challenge is staying grounded while they happen. Can you continue focusing on your growth, even when others are watching? Can you remain patient when people form opinions about you that may not fully understand your journey? Can you continue choosing integrity when shortcuts might appear tempting? Those questions matter far more than any discussion taking place behind closed doors. Because in the end, people may debate who you are. They may argue about what you represent. Some will admire your direction while others question it. But your responsibility remains the same: to keep developing the qualities that brought you this far, to stay thoughtful in your decisions, to remain patient in moments of pressure, and to remember that true strength is not proven by how loudly the world talks about you, but by how steadily you continue walking your path regardless of the noise. Over time, something even more interesting begins to happen. The conversations about you slowly fade into the background, but the impact of your presence does not disappear. In fact, it often grows stronger. Why? Because people eventually move past speculation and start observing reality. They watch how you respond when life becomes difficult. They notice how you treat people when no attention is involved. They pay attention to whether your principles remain steady or shift depending on the situation. Consistency answers questions that words never can. Many people can appear confident for a short moment. Anyone can sound wise in a single conversation. But maintaining calm judgment, patience, and discipline over long periods of time is something entirely different. It requires self-awareness. And self-awareness is rare. Think about how many people move through life reacting to whatever appears in front of them. A criticism appears, and they react immediately. A rumor spreads, and they rush to defend themselves. a challenge emerges and frustration takes over. But someone who has developed inner balance approaches these situations differently. They pause. They observe. They think carefully before responding. This doesn't mean they are passive. It means they are intentional. And intention is powerful because it prevents unnecessary mistakes. It allows a person to move through complicated situations without becoming consumed by them. People around you notice that difference more than you might think. They see that you don't chase every argument. They see that you don't waste time proving yourself to those who have already decided what they want to believe. Instead, you focus on actions, progress, and steady improvement. That approach confuses some people at first. They expect reactions. They expect emotional responses. They expect the same patterns they see everywhere else. But when those reactions never arrive, curiosity turns into realization. They begin to understand that your strength does not come from controlling others or dominating conversations. It comes from controlling your own responses. And once people recognize that level of discipline, the discussions around you take on a new tone. Instead of asking, "Is that person really different?" the question becomes, how did they develop that kind of mindset? Some people will quietly study your behavior, not in a negative way, but in a reflective way. They begin examining their own reactions, their own habits, their own decisions. Because when someone witnesses calm strength, it creates a silent invitation. An invitation to grow. Not everyone accepts that invitation. Some people remain attached to old patterns. They prefer familiar reactions and predictable outcomes. But others begin changing small things in their own lives. They pause before reacting. They think more carefully about their priorities. They start recognizing that discipline and patience create stability over time. And without realizing it, your example becomes a quiet influence. Not because you tried to lead anyone, not because you demanded attention, but because steady character naturally creates direction for those who are searching for it. That is the hidden power behind the conversations people once had about you. At first, they were simply trying to understand what made you different. Now they are beginning to understand something deeper. The difference was never about being special. It was about choosing growth when it was easier to stay the same. And when a person makes that choice consistently, the world around them eventually notices.